Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast, where we like to really just get into the heart of Islamic teachings.
Yeah.
And today we're going on a pretty fascinating journey, I think, through Sunan Abu Dawud,
Right.
8th Book 9, which is all about sacrifice.
It's a topic that resonates, not just within Islam,
Right.
but across various cultures and spiritual traditions.
Yeah.
The act of offering something precious, whether it's time, resources, or even, deeply held beliefs. It kind of speaks to this fundamental human desire to connect with something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And through this deep dive, we're aiming to uncover those layers of meaning embedded within the Islamic tradition of sacrifice.
Yes.
And whether our listeners are seeking a deeper understanding of Islamic practices,
Right.
or just intrigued by the historical and cultural significance of this whole concept of sacrifice, we're here to guide you through it.
Yeah, we'll be exploring how these practices evolved from pre-Islamic times to the Prophet Muhammad's teaching.
Right.
We'll be examining the different types of sacrifice.
And unpacking the ethical considerations and spiritual insights that lie at the heart of this tradition.
So let's dive right in.
Okay.
The concept of sacrifice in Islam is multifaceted. And one of the first questions that arises is the question of obligation. Was sacrifice ever considered mandatory
Right.
for all Muslims as a practice?
That's a great starting point.
Yeah.
Hadith 2782, for instance,
Okay.
suggests that initially the Prophet Muhammad
Okay.
did mandate sacrifice in something called a tira for every family.
Tira.
Yes.
Now, that's a term I haven't encountered before.
Okay.
What exactly does it refer to?
So a tira was a specific type of sacrifice performed during the month of Rajab,
Okay.
which predates Islam. However,
Yeah.
as Abu Dawud himself notes in his compilation,
Right.
this particular practice was later abrogated.
Abrogated. So
Yeah.
essentially it was superseded by a later revelation.
Yes.
Ruling,
Yeah.
rendering it no longer obligatory.
Precise. Okay.
And this highlights the dynamic nature of Islamic jurisprudence.
Right.
It demonstrates how Islamic teachings,
Okay.
while rooted in divine revelation, also take into account
Yeah.
the evolving needs and circumstances of the community.
That's a fascinating point.
Yeah.
So while a tira itself is no longer practiced,
Right.
the fact that it was initially mandated
Mhm.
raises interesting questions about the evolution of the concept of sacrifice
Indeed.
within Islam.
And this leads us to another crucial aspect of obligation.
Okay.
The capacity to sacrifice.
Hmm.
Hadith 2783 presents a scenario where a man
Okay.
asks about sacrificing a borrowed animal.
Oh, interesting.
The Prophet explicitly states that this is not permissible,
Okay.
emphasizing that the act of sacrifice must be a genuine offering,
Right.
stemming from one's own resources and capabilities.
So it's not merely about going through the motions, but about the sincerity and intention behind the act.
Absolutely. Islam acknowledges the diversity of individual circumstances and emphasizes the importance of internal disposition over mere outward actions.
I see.
The Prophet's advice in this hadith, where he suggests alternatives like
Okay.
grooming the animal if one cannot afford to purchase it,
Right.
further reinforces this principle of flexibility and accommodation within Islamic law.
This resonates with the broader Islamic emphasis on finding a middle ground
Yeah.
between
Yes.
fulfilling religious obligations
Yeah.
and recognizing individual limitations.
Exactly.
It's not about imposing undue burdens,
Right.
but rather encouraging a spirit of sincere devotion within one's capacity.
Precisely. The spirit of sacrifice lies in the willingness to offer something precious for a higher purpose, and that can manifest in various forms, depending on one's individual circumstances and abilities.
This makes me think about another dimension of sacrifice,
Okay.
the ability to perform it on behalf of others,
Right.
specifically those who have passed away.
Okay.
Hadith 2784 mentions Ali ibn Abu Talib.
Yes.
The Prophet's cousin and son-in-law performing a sacrifice on behalf of the Prophet Muhammad himself.
That's a beautiful practice within Islam.
Yeah.
Extending acts of worship and devotion to loved ones who have departed, it speaks to the enduring bonds of love.
Right.
And the belief that good deeds can benefit not only ourselves, but also those who have passed on.
It's a testament to the concept of interconnectedness,
Right.
recognizing that even death
Yes.
doesn't sever the ties of spiritual kinship.
Exactly. And it reflects a broader understanding of sacrifice as an act that transcends individual boundaries.
Right.
Connecting us to a larger spiritual reality.
Yeah.
And extending its benefits beyond our immediate sphere.
Now, moving on from the general principles of sacrifice,
Yeah.
let's delve into some of the specific guidelines and recommendations outlined in Sunan Abu Dawud,
Right.
Hadiths 2785 through 2800.
Mm-hmm.
Cover a range of prohibitions and recommendations,
Yes.
starting with some intriguing instructions.
For those intending to perform the sacrifice.
For example, Hadith 2785 states that individuals who intend to sacrifice after sighting the new moon
Okay.
of Dhu al-Hisha,
Right.
the month of the Hajj pilgrimage,
Yeah.
are prohibited from cutting their hair or nails.
Oh, interesting.
It's as if they're entering a state of ritual purity and preparation,
I see.
symbolizing their dedication to the upcoming act of sacrifice.
It's fascinating how these seemingly minor actions
Right.
are imbued with spiritual significance.
And it underscores the idea that sacrifice isn't just a physical act, but a holistic endeavor that involves our physical,
Right.
mental, and spiritual states.
I'm also curious about the descriptions of the Prophet's preferred sacrificial animals.
Okay.
Hadiths 2786 and 2787 mention horned rams with specific markings,
Yes.
camels and rams with particular colors.
Mm-hmm.
Do these physical attributes hold any symbolic meaning?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that has been debated among scholars.
Right.
While the hadiths themselves don't explicitly state symbolic reasons for these preferences,
Yeah.
various interpretations have been offered throughout Islamic history. Some scholars suggest that the focus on choosing the best and healthiest animals,
Right.
as evidenced by their physical attributes,
Yeah.
is a mark of respect for the act of sacrifice.
It's about offering the most pristine and valuable
Exactly.
of what we possess as a testament to our devotion.
Precisely. Others view it as a way to connect with the Abrahamic tradition,
Oh, okay.
as these types of animals were also favored for sacrifice in earlier scriptures.
I see.
It adds another layer of meaning and historical depth to the practice.
It's these layers of interpretation and historical connections that make exploring Islamic teachings so enriching.
Yeah.
So we have the general principles of sacrifice, the
Yeah.
specific instructions for those intending to sacrifice, and now let's move on to another crucial aspect,
Okay.
the age of the sacrificial animal.
Yes.
Hadiths 2791 to 2795 delve into the age requirements,
Right.
highlighting the importance of offering animals that have reached a certain level of maturity.
Yes. The hadiths clearly state that fully grown animals are preferred for sacrifice.
Right.
This preference reflects the idea of offering something that has reached its full potential, symbolizing the culmination of growth and development.
Okay.
However, the hadiths also acknowledge that hardship and limitations might prevent some individuals from acquiring fully grown animals.
So there's a degree of flexibility built
Limitation.
into the guidelines.
In cases of hardship, lambs are permitted as sacrificial animals.
Right.
This accommodation underscores the principle of compassion
Yeah.
and practicality within Islamic law.
Right.
It ensures that individuals are not burdened beyond their means, and that the essence of sacrifice, which lies in sincerity and intention,
Right.
is not lost due to material limitations.
And speaking of practical considerations,
Right.
I'm reminded of that fascinating anecdote about Abu Burda sacrificing early
Right.
before the Eid prayer. It's a reminder that procedures and timing matter,
Yeah,
but the core intention is also considered.
absolutely. Hadith 2795 recounts this incident where Abu Burda, thinking it was already permitted,
Right.
performed the sacrifice before the Eid prayer.
Yeah.
The Prophet clarifies that while his sacrifice is still valid, it should ideally be performed after the prayer.
I see.
This highlights the significance of following established procedures and
Right.
communal norms.
It emphasizes the importance of aligning individual actions
Yeah.
with collective practices, even when the underlying intention is pure.
It reinforces the idea that Islam is not just about personal piety,
Right.
but also about participating in a shared system of rituals and practices
Yeah.
that bind the community together. Yeah. Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. I hope our previous exploration of sacrifice in Islam left you with a deeper appreciation for the complexities and nuances of this profound concept.
It certainly has for me. Unpacking these hadiths has been like peeling back layers of meaning, revealing the historical evolution, ethical considerations, and spiritual depth embedded within the Islamic tradition of sacrifice.
Exactly. And as we continue our journey through Sunan Abu Dawud, we'll encounter even more insights that challenge our assumptions and deepen our understanding.
Before we move on, though, I wanted to circle back to something we touched upon earlier, the concept of aqiqah, the sacrifice performed for a newborn child. You mentioned that it's a beautiful example of how ritual and symbolism are intertwined in Islam. Could you elaborate on that?
Of course, akika is more than just a simple act of sacrificing an animal. It's a ceremony imbued with layers of meaning that connect us to the past, the present, and the future. The sacrifice itself symbolizes gratitude to Allah for the gift of a child, acknowledging the preciousness of life and the divine blessing that it represents.
It's a tangible expression of thankfulness for the miracle of creation.
Exactly. And then we have the act of shaving the baby's head, which represents purification and a fresh start. It signifies a symbolic shedding of the past and a welcoming of new beginnings.
It's like cleansing the slate, making way for a life filled with blessings and spiritual growth.
Precisely. And the smearing of saffron, a precious and fragrant spice, adds another layer of symbolism. Saffron is often associated with blessings, good fortune, and prosperity. By applying it to the baby's head, parents are invoking divine favor and wishing for a bright future for their child.
It's a beautiful way to infuse a ritual with hope and aspirations for the child's journey through life.
Absolutely. And all these elements combine to create a ceremony that's not only about fulfilling a religious obligation, but also about forging a deep spiritual connection between the child, the family, and the community. It's a reminder that Islamic rituals are rarely just outward actions. They are designed to engage our hearts and minds, connecting us to a deeper spiritual reality.
Okay, now that we've revisited Akika, let's continue our deep dive into Sunan Abu Dawud. Where do we pick up in our exploration of the different types of sacrifice?
Well, we've discussed the obligation of sacrifice, the importance of intention, the permissibility of sacrificing on behalf of the deceased, and the guidelines for those intending to perform the sacrifice. Now let's turn our attention back to some of the practical and even somewhat surprising aspects of sacrifice outlined in the Hadiths.
You're referring to those instances where tools other than knives were permitted for slaughter. It was quite surprising to learn about those exceptions.
Indeed, it's one of those areas where Islamic law demonstrates its remarkable practicality and adaptability. Hadiths 28:15 to 28:19 describe situations where using flints, splinters of wood, or even piercing the thigh was considered acceptable for slaughter, particularly in emergencies or when a knife was not readily available.
It challenges the assumption that Islamic law is always rigid and inflexible.
Absolutely. It showcases a nuanced approach that prioritizes the essence of the act over strict adherence to a specific form. The key principle, as we discussed earlier, is to cause the blood to flow and to mention Allah's name while doing so. As long as these conditions are met, the specific tool used becomes secondary.
It's about recognizing the limitations of human circumstances and providing practical solutions without compromising the fundamental principles of the act.
Precisely. And this reminds us that Islamic jurisprudence, when properly understood, is not meant to be burdensome or overly complicated. It aims to guide us toward a path of righteousness while also acknowledging the complexities of lived experience. It's a system of guidance that seeks to be both spiritually meaningful and practically applicable.
It makes me think about those other hadiths we discussed earlier regarding the permissibility of consuming meat slaughtered by people of the book, Jews and Christians. That also seemed like a significant example of how Islamic teachings can adapt to different cultural contexts.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating example of how Islamic understanding evolved over time, moving from a stricter interpretation to a more inclusive one. Initially, as we see in some of the earlier hadiths, there seemed to be a prohibition against eating meat that had not been slaughtered by Muslims.
It likely stemmed from concerns about ensuring the meat was prepared according to Islamic guidelines, especially given the emphasis on mentioning Allah's name during slaughter.
Exactly. However, as we see in Hadith 28:11, a later revelation as recorded in the Quranic verse, the food of the people of the book is lawful unto you, and yours is lawful unto them, appears to abrogate or supersede the earlier ruling.
So a later revelation provided a more expansive perspective, recognizing the shared values and practices between Islam and other Abrahamic faiths.
Precisely. This shift reflects a recognition of the commonalities between these faiths and emphasizes the importance of fostering respectful relationships with other communities. It also highlights the importance of understanding the context and chronology of revelation when interpreting religious texts. What might seem like a contradiction at first glance often reveals a deeper wisdom and a nuanced approach to guiding human behavior.
It's a reminder that Islamic teachings aren't static, but rather a dynamic body of knowledge that has evolved over time, responding to changing social realities and promoting greater inclusivity.
Indeed. And this leads us back to another recurring theme in our exploration of sacrifice: the profound emphasis on animal welfare. The hadiths we've discussed repeatedly stress the importance of treating animals with kindness and minimizing their suffering, even in the act of sacrifice.
Yes, the condemnation of using animals for target, practice the instruction to sharpen knives to reduce pain, the prohibition against sacrificing an animal in front of other animals. These all speak to a deep respect for animal life and a recognition of their sentience.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that our treatment of animals is a reflection of our own character and spirituality. Even in the act of sacrifice, which might seem inherently violent, Islam stresses the importance of compassion and minimizing harm.
It's about recognizing that animals, just like humans, are capable of experiencing pain and fear, and that we have a responsibility to treat them with care and respect.
Exactly. And this echoes the broader Islamic understanding of animals as sentient beings deserving of ethical treatment. The Quran itself speaks about the ways in which animals glorify Allah and possess their own forms of consciousness and community. We are called to recognize their inherent dignity and to act accordingly.
This raises an important question. How can we apply these principles of compassion and ethical treatment to our modern-day interactions with animals, even beyond the context of ritual sacrifice? Especially given the realities of factory farming and mass production where animal welfare is often compromised for economic gain.
That's a crucial question for Muslims today. We need to critically examine our practices in areas like the mass production of meat factory farming, the use of animals in entertainment and research, and ensure that they align with Islamic values of compassion and respect for all of creation.
It's about recognizing that our responsibility to animals extends far beyond simply fulfilling a ritual obligation. It's about embodying a spirit of compassion and care in all aspects of our lives, recognizing the interconnectedness of all living beings.
Beautifully said. And this leads us to another intriguing detail in the Hadiths, one that might seem surprising at first glance, but reveals a deeper layer of practicality and wisdom within Islamic rulings.
You're talking about the ruling regarding the embryo found inside a slaughtered animal.
Right.
I have to admit it was a detail that caught me off guard initially.
I can understand why. It's not a topic that comes up in everyday conversation, but it's a perfect example of how Islamic teachings address even the most specific and seemingly unusual situations, providing guidance that's rooted in practicality and a holistic understanding of life.
So what exactly do the Hadith say about this particular situation?
Hadiths 2821 and 2822 address this very scenario, stating that consuming the embryo found inside a slaughtered animal is permissible. The reasoning behind this ruling is that the slaughter of the mother is considered sufficient. The life of the embryo is intrinsically linked to the life of the mother, and its death is a consequence of the mother's slaughter.
So it's not seen as a separate act requiring a separate slaughter. It's an extension of the initial act and therefore permissible to consume.
Exactly. And this ruling reflects a focus on minimizing waste and utilizing resources responsibly. It recognizes the sanctity of life while also acknowledging the practicalities of sustenance and consumption.
It also highlights the interconnectedness of life, recognizing that the embryo's existence is dependent on the mother's existence.
Precisely. And this interconnectedness is a theme that runs through all of creation, reminding us of our place within the grand tapestry of life and our responsibility to treat all creatures with respect and care.
It's a powerful message that resonates deeply even in the context of what might seem like a very specific and even somewhat unusual ruling.
And it leads us to another instance where practicality and leniency shine through in Islamic teachings. The situation where it's uncertain whether Allah's name was pronounced during slaughter. We often think of religious rituals as requiring absolute precision and certainty, but these hadiths remind us that there's room for human error and that Islam offers guidance even in situations of doubt.
Yes, Hadith 28823 addresses this very scenario. It must be reassuring for individuals to know that there's a remedy for such situations, especially given the emphasis on mentioning Allah's name during slaughter.
Absolutely. The Prophet's instruction in this hadith is simple and straightforward. If there's doubt about whether Allah's name was pronounced during slaughter, one simply needs to pronounce the name before consuming the meat. This emphasizes that Islam is not about creating unnecessary burdens or anxieties. It's about guiding us toward a path of righteousness in a way that acknowledges human limitations and the complexities of lived experience.
It's a beautiful reminder that our intentions and sincere efforts to follow divine guidance are ultimately what matters most. And it speaks to the merciful nature of Islam, recognizing that we are fallible beings and providing solutions that are both practical and spiritually meaningful.
Exactly. And now, having explored the diverse aspects of sacrifice in the Prophet Muhammad's teachings, Let's take a step back in time and examine some of the pre-Islamic practices that existed in Arabia before the advent of Islam hadiths. 2824 to 2827 provide fascinating insights into these ancient traditions, revealing how Islam both built upon and reformed existing cultural practices.
You're referring to Farah and Atira, right? We briefly touched upon Atira earlier, but I'm eager to learn more about both of these practices and how they fit into the broader context of sacrifice in the Arabian Peninsula.
Absolutely. Farah, as described in these hadiths, involves sacrificing the firstborn animal, often as a way to appease deities or seek blessings. It was a practice rooted in a more animistic worldview, where spirits and supernatural forces were believed to influence various aspects of life.
So it was a way to establish a connection with the divine or supernatural realm through the offering of a prized possession.
Exactly. Atira, as we discussed earlier, was a sacrifice performed specifically during the month of Rajab. This practice likely stemmed from the significance attributed to specific months and seasons in pre-Islamic Arabia, where cycles of nature and celestial events held deep cultural and spiritual meaning.
These practices offer a glimpse into the rich tapestry of beliefs and rituals that existed in the Arabian Peninsula before the arrival of Islam.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is how Islam interacted with these existing practices, preserving certain elements while also purifying and elevating them to align with its core principles.
So it was a process of both continuity and transformation, building upon existing cultural foundations while also introducing new meanings and understandings.
Exactly. The Prophet Muhammad, in his wisdom, recognized the need to address the social and cultural realities of his time while also guiding people toward a more refined and spiritually elevated way of life.
It's a testament to the nuanced and contextual approach that Islam takes to establishing a new religious and social order.
And this process of both continuity and transformation is beautifully exemplified in the practice of aqiqah, which we discussed earlier. While animal sacrifice was already a prevalent custom in pre-Islamic Arabia, aqiqah in its Islamic form took on new layers of meaning, shifting the focus from appeasement of deities to gratitude towards Allah purification and the invocation of blessings for the newborn child.
It's a fascinating example of how Islam transformed existing cultural practices, imbuing them with new spiritual significance and integrating them into a cohesive system of beliefs and rituals.
And on that note of historical and cultural insight, I think we should pause our deep dive here for now. We've covered a lot of ground today, delving into the practical, the ethical, and even the somewhat surprising aspects of sacrifice as described in Sunan Abu Dawud.
We'll pick up our exploration in the next part, listeners, where we'll delve even deeper into the spiritual significance and timeless lessons embedded within these ancient teachings. Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. Ready to conclude our exploration of sacrifice as depicted in Sunan Abu Dawud.
Absolutely. We've traversed a remarkable terrain, from the historical roots and ethical dimensions to the practical guidelines and those fascinating exceptions that reveal the dynamism of Islamic law.
It's been an enlightening journey through this collection of hadiths, and I feel like we've only just begun to uncover the depth and richness of this topic.
Right.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key themes or insights that have resonated with you throughout our discussions?
One overarching theme that stands out for me is the profound emphasis on intentionality.
Right.
Time and again, we see that the outward act of sacrifice is meaningless without a sincere heart and a genuine desire to draw closer to Allah.
Right.
It's not about blindly following rituals, but about aligning our actions with our inner state of devotion.
Yes, those hadiths about borrowing an animal for sacrifice really highlight this point.
Exactly.
The Prophet's clear prohibition against this practice underscores that sacrifice should be a genuine offering from one's own resources.
Yes.
A testament to one's commitment and willingness to give for a higher purpose.
Exactly. It's about aligning our actions with our inner convictions, ensuring that our outward expressions of faith reflect a genuine inner transformation.
Right.
And this emphasis on intentionality is beautifully intertwined with another key theme we've encountered.
Okay.
The concept of balance.
Mm.
Islam acknowledges the reality of varying circumstances
Right.
and emphasizes finding a middle ground between fulfilling religious obligations and recognizing individual limitations.
It's about recognizing that faith isn't about rigid adherence to rules,
Right.
but about finding a path that's both meaningful and sustainable within our individual capacity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We see this principle reflected in those instances where lambs were permitted for sacrifice instead of fully grown animals if someone was facing hardship. Or the later permission to store more sacrificial meat after the initial instruction to distribute most of it as charity.
Okay.
These examples showcase the adaptability of Islamic teachings and the focus on promoting both individual piety and communal well-being. It's about finding a balance that allows us to grow spiritually while also taking into account the realities of our lives
Right.
and the needs of those around us.
Another powerful theme that emerged throughout our exploration is the concept of compassion,
Yes.
particularly as it relates to animal welfare. Even the context of sacrifice, which might seem inherently contradictory to the idea of compassion.
Right.
Islam stresses the importance of treating all creatures with kindness and minimizing their suffering.
Those hadiths condemning the use of animals for target practice, emphasizing the need to sharpen knives to reduce pain during slaughter,
Right.
and prohibiting the sacrifice of an animal in front of other animals,
Yeah.
all point to a deep respect for animal life and a recognition of their sentience. It's a profound message, especially in today's world where the mass production of meat and factory farming practices
Right.
often disregard animal welfare for economic gain.
It's a reminder that our responsibility towards animals extends far beyond fulfilling a ritual obligation.
Yes.
It's about cultivating a spirit of compassion that permeates all aspects of our lives, recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings and our shared responsibility to care for creation.
This sense of interconnectedness is beautifully reflected in those hadiths about consuming meat slaughtered by people of the book. It's a fascinating example of how Islamic teachings can evolve over time
Right.
to promote greater inclusivity and understanding between different faith communities,
Yeah.
recognizing the shared values and practices that bind us together.
It challenges us to move beyond rigid interpretations and embrace a more dynamic understanding of Islamic law, one that's rooted in core principles, but also responsive to changing social realities
Right.
and the need to foster respectful relationships with those of other faiths.
And ultimately, I think that's what this deep dive into sacrifice has been about. It's
Yeah.
not just about the physical act of offering, but about the inner transformation. It's
Yeah.
meant to inspire.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating a spirit of surrender, gratitude, and compassion that extends beyond the ritual itself
Right.
and permeates all aspects of our lives.
So how can we apply these principles of sacrifice,
Right.
both literal and metaphorical, in our
Right.
lives today? Beyond the specific context of ritual sacrifice,
Yeah.
how can we embody this spirit of offering and selflessness
Okay.
in our daily interactions?
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
Sacrifice, in its broader sense, encompasses any act where we willingly give up something we hold dear
Okay.
for a greater good.
Right.
It could be sacrificing our time to help someone in need, our resources to support a worthy cause,
Right.
or even our own desires for the sake of fulfilling a responsibility or upholding a moral principle. It's about recognizing that true growth and fulfillment often come from letting go, from surrendering to a higher purpose that
Yeah.
transcends our individual ego.
And those small everyday acts of kindness,
Mm-hmm.
patience, generosity,
Yeah.
where we put someone else's needs before our own, those are often the most profound expressions of sacrifice.
Right.
They might not involve grand gestures or public displays, but they reflect a deep-seated commitment to living a life of service and compassion.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And it's through these acts, both big and small,
Right.
that we cultivate a spirit of humility,
Mhm.
recognizing that we are not the center of the universe,
Right.
but part of a larger interconnected web of life.
Okay.
It's in these moments of selflessness that we truly connect with the divine,
Right.
transcending our limited selves and tapping into a source of strength and fulfillment
Mhm.
that lies beyond our individual desires.
And with that, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive into Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 9, Sacrifice. It's been an enlightening journey, and I hope our listeners have gained a deeper appreciation for the richness and complexity of these teachings.
I believe we've only just scratched the surface of this profound topic, and I encourage you to continue exploring these hadiths, reflecting on their meanings,
Yes.
and considering how the concept of sacrifice in all its multifaceted forms can enrich your own spiritual journey.
Until next time, listeners, may your lives be filled with blessings, and may you find meaning and purpose in the sacrifices you make, both big and small, beheld.